The statue was looking at her. Sable stood frozen in the center of the sanctum hall, her cleaning rag dripping soapy water onto the ancient stone floor, and stared back at the wolf. It had moved. She was certain of it. 5 minutes ago, when she had begun wiping down the offering pedestals, the sacred wolf of Edenmere had been facing north, the same direction it had faced for a millennium, its stone muzzle pointed toward the mountain pass where the first pack had crossed into the valley. Every child in the territory knew this. Every elder recited it. The sacred wolf faces north, because the north remembers. But now it was facing her. Its massive stone head had turned a full quarter rotation on a neck that should not have been able to turn at all because it was carved from a single block of moonite, a mineral so dense that even master stonemasons needed diamond-tipped tools to shape it. The wolf's open jaws, which had always seemed ceremonial in their stillness, now looked ready to close around something. Its eyes, two polished spheres of black opal that had stared blankly northward since before the kingdom had a name, were locked directly onto her face. Sable's breath came out shaking. She took one step backward. The wolf's eyes followed. Not physically, not another grinding turn of ancient stone, but something behind those dark spheres shifted like light, bending through deep water. Alive. Aware. Watching. The rag slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a wet slap that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. She was a nobody. A temple sweeper. The lowest rung of the sanctum's domestic staff, hired 3 months ago because the previous girl had eloped with a tanner's apprentice, and someone needed to mop the floors before dawn prayers. Sable had no bloodline, no rank, no pack affiliation. She had grown up in the charity wards of the outer settlement, nameless and unclaimed, one of dozens of orphaned children fed and housed by the temple's modest generosity. Sacred wolves did not look at people like her. Sacred wolves did not look at anyone. They were stone. A door groaned open behind her. Sable spun around. High Keeper Oren stood in the arched doorway, his morning tea still steaming in his hand. He was a tall, thin man with a silver-streaked beard and the permanently disappointed expression of someone who had spent 40 years maintaining a building that was older than most civilizations. He looked at Sable. He looked past her at the statue. His tea hit the floor. The porcelain shattered against the stone tiles, and the sound rang through the sanctum hall like a bell. Oren's face drained of every drop of color. "Do not move," he whispered. "Whatever you do, girl, do not move." Sable's legs locked. Oren backed out of the doorway without taking his eyes off the statue and disappeared into the corridor. She could hear him running, then his voice, high and cracking, shouting for the temple guard. She was alone with the wolf. The silence that followed was immense. The morning light coming through the eastern windows caught the wolf's opal eyes at an angle that made them glow faintly amber from within, like embers buried in ash. Sable could not look away. A sensation deep inside her stirred, a thread she had never felt before, taut and trembling, connecting her to the stone animal across the hall, like a fishing line hooked beneath her ribs. She did not understand it. She did not want it. She wanted to be back in the storage closet sorting rags and pretending today was ordinary. But the wolf was looking at her, and somewhere in the marrow of her bones, she felt an answer rising, a recognition she could not name. The doors exploded open. 6 temple guards flooded the hall, followed by Oren, followed by 3 senior priestesses in ceremonial white. Followed by a man Sable had never seen in person, but recognized instantly from the portrait hanging in every public building in Edenmere. Archon Calum Voss, Alpha of the Edenmere territory, ruler of the 5 valley packs. He was enormous, the kind of tall and broad that made doorways feel like suggestions. Dark hair cut close, jaw sharp enough to cast its own shadow, and eyes the color of winter sage, pale green and utterly still. He moved through the guards like water through rocks, unhurried and inevitable, and stopped 10 paces from the statue. His gaze swept the wolf, then found Sable. She felt the weight of his attention land on her like a physical thing, pressing down on her shoulders, compressing her lungs. "Who is she?" Archon Voss asked. "A sweeper, my lord," Orin stammered. "She was cleaning when it happened." The Archon's gaze did not leave her face. "The wolf has not moved in a millennium," he said quietly, "and it moved for her." Before Sable could speak, the statue moved again. A grinding sound filled the hall, deep and resonant, vibrating through the floor and up through her legs. The wolf's great stone body shifted, its front legs extending, its massive head lowering until its muzzle pointed directly at the ground before Sable's feet. It was bowing. The sacred wolf of Edenmere, the immortal guardian, the Millennium Sentinel, was bowing to a temple sweeper. Every person in the room dropped to their knees. Every person except the Archon, who remained standing, his pale green eyes fixed on Sable with an intensity that made her stomach turn to water. "Bring her to the Sanctum Council," he said. "Now." The council chamber smelled of cedar smoke and old decisions. Sable sat on a wooden bench against the wall, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles ached, and tried to make herself small, while 14 of the most powerful people in Edenmere argued about what to do with her. She caught fragments: prophecy, bloodline contamination, security risk, ancient texts. Someone mentioned banishment casually, like they were discussing what to serve for lunch, and Sable's vision went gray at the edges. High Keeper Orin was referencing scrolls, his voice strained. "The Codex of Firsts is explicit. The sacred wolf responds only to the presence of a true bonded alpha bloodline. It cannot be faked or coerced. Whatever this girl is, she carries old blood." "She is a foundling," snapped Priestess Halcyon, a severe woman with iron-gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face. "No lineage, no records, no documentation of parentage whatsoever. She could be a plant from the Ashridge Compact." "A plant," Orin repeated flatly. "You think a rival faction planted a baby in our orphanage 22 years ago, on the off chance that the sacred wolf might one day acknowledge her?" "Stranger things have happened," Halcyon replied, though her tone suggested she knew how absurd it sounded. Sable risked a glance toward the head of the table. Archon Voss sat motionless, his chin resting on his steepled fingers, listening without reaction. His stillness was more unnerving than the shouting. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and that strange tug flared in her chest, sharp and disorienting, like a compass needle swinging hard toward true north. She looked away quickly, but not quickly enough. Commander Thessaly, a broad-shouldered woman with close-cropped auburn hair and the bearing of someone who had broken bones and set them herself, leaned forward. "Practical question. Has anyone actually asked the girl what happened?" 14 heads turned toward Sable. She wished desperately for the floor to open beneath her. "I was mopping," she said, and her voice came out smaller than she wanted. She cleared her throat. "I was cleaning the offering pedestals. I had my back to the statue. I heard stone grinding, and when I turned around, it was facing me. I did not touch it. I did not do anything." "Did you feel anything?" Orin asked, leaning forward. "Any warmth? Any sensation?" Sable hesitated. That thread hooked beneath her ribs, still trembling faintly. She did not want to admit to it. Admitting it made it real, made her part of whatever this was, and she wanted no part of it. "No," she lied. "She is lying," Archon Voss said. The room went silent. His voice was low, measured, and completely certain. He was not guessing. He was not fishing. He knew. "The wolf bowed to you," the Archon said, pinning her in place with his gaze. "It has never bowed. Not to any alpha, any priestess, any ruler in the entire recorded history of this territory. And you felt nothing?" "I felt a pull," she admitted quietly, "like something was reaching for me." The chamber erupted. Voices overlapped, chairs scraped. The Archon raised one hand. The room fell silent instantly. The authority in that gesture was absolute, effortless, terrifying. Clear the chamber. Everyone except the girl, Orin, and Commander Thessaly. When the door closed, the Archon moved around the table toward her. Each step was deliberate, measured. Sable's heart rate climbed with every one. He stopped 4 feet away and looked down at her. "The sacred wolf is not merely a statue, he said. It is a seal. A lock placed over something buried beneath the sanctum by the first Alpha of Edenmere. Something that was never meant to be disturbed." "What is buried there?" Sable asked. "That knowledge has been lost," Orin said quietly. "The original texts were destroyed in the burning of the archives 3 centuries ago. All we know is that the wolf guards it, and that the wolf has never moved. Until today. And now it has acknowledged you," the Archon said. "Which means you are either the key to what is sealed beneath this temple, or the warning that the seal is breaking. Either way, you are not leaving this building." "Am I a prisoner?" Sable asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Something shifted in his expression, not quite softening, but close. "You are under the protection of the Archon's household, for your safety and for the safety of everyone in this territory." "That sounds like a very polite prison," Sable said. Commander Thessaly made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. The Archon's jaw tightened, but his eyes held a flicker of warmth, quickly buried. "You will tell me if it changes," he said. "If the sensation grows stronger, if it shifts direction. Is that understood?" He turned toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame. Without turning back, he said, "The wolf did not just acknowledge you, Miss Sable. It submitted to you. In all recorded history, it has never submitted to anyone." A pause. "Not even to me." The door closed behind him. Sable sat alone on the bench, her pulse still racing, and felt the thread tighten like a fist closing around something fragile. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the narrow bed they had given her on the temple's upper floor, staring at the ceiling and listening to the building breathe around her. Twice the tug surged, a sudden intensifying that made her gasp and press her hand flat against her sternum. Both times it faded after a few seconds, leaving her shaken and wide-eyed in the dark. Just before dawn, she heard footsteps in the corridor outside her door. Heavy, deliberate, pacing. They stopped outside her room for a long moment, then moved on. In the morning, Commander Thessaly arrived with breakfast and a grim expression. "The Archon wants you in the sanctum hall. Something happened overnight." Sable's stomach clenched. What kind of something? Thessaly's mouth pressed into a thin line. The kind where the statue moved again, and this time, it was not just the head. The sacred wolf had stepped off its pedestal. Sable stood in the doorway of the sanctum hall and stared. The massive stone wolf had moved forward, its front paws now resting on the hall floor, its hind legs still on the platform, its body caught mid-descent like a dog climbing off a bed. The stone around the pedestal's edge was cracked where the weight had shifted, hairline fractures spreading through the ancient marble. "It happened around the 3rd hour past midnight," Orin said beside her, his voice hushed. The night guards heard the grinding and came running. By the time they arrived, it had stopped. Sable stepped into the hall. The tug flared immediately, stronger than before, warm and urgent. The wolf's opal eyes caught the morning light, and that same deep amber glow pulsed within them. "It is moving toward you," Archon Voss said from behind her. She had not heard him approach. His voice was close, low, and it sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the statue. She turned and found him standing barely 3 feet away, his winter sage eyes fixed not on the wolf, but on her. "Every movement it has made since yesterday has been in your direction," he continued. "Your chamber is directly above this hall. Last night, it moved toward you." "I want you to approach it," the Archon said. And you are certain that is wise? No, the Archon said, and for the briefest moment a flicker of vulnerability crossed his face. But I will be beside you. That should not have been comforting. He was the most powerful and dangerous alpha in the 5 valleys, a man whose reputation for ruthless precision in battle was matched only by his cold composure. Being beside him should have made her more afraid, not less. But the fear loosened its grip, and Sable walked forward. The Archon matched her pace, staying 1 step to her right and slightly ahead. His body angled between her and the wolf in a way that seemed instinctive rather than deliberate. She noticed it. She filed it away and tried not to think about what it meant. 10 paces from the wolf, the tug became a hum, vibrating through her bones. At 5 paces, it was a roar, filling her skull, drowning out thought. At 3 paces, she stopped. Not because of fear, but because something else had happened. The Archon had stopped beside her, and his breathing had changed. She glanced at him. His jaw was clenched, his hands balled into fists at his sides, and his eyes were closed. A fine tremor ran through his shoulders. "My lord?" Sable said, alarmed. His eyes opened. They were no longer winter sage, they were gold, bright and burning. The unmistakable shift of a wolf pressing forward behind a human face. He blinked hard and the gold receded, but not entirely. Flecks of it remained, glinting in the green like sparks caught in ice. "Something is resonating," he said through his teeth. "The closer you get to the statue, the more I can feel it. Like a frequency I cannot shut out." "Feel what?" He looked at her, and the raw confusion in his expression was so unguarded, so completely at odds with the controlled mask he wore, that it stole her breath. "You," he said. Then he turned sharply and walked away, his stride too fast, too rigid, the movement of a man retreating from something he had not expected. Sable stood alone before the sacred wolf, his single word echoing through her like a stone dropped into still water. The rest of the day passed in examinations and questions. Scholars measured the statue's new position with knotted cords and argued in whispers about gravitational anomalies. Priestess Halcyon performed 3 separate divination rituals, each producing inconclusive results that she blamed on atmospheric interference. Sable was poked, prodded, asked to recite her full history, which took approximately 40 seconds since she had almost none, and made to stand at various distances from the statue, while people recorded whether the wolf's eyes tracked her movement. They did. By evening, Commander Thessaly escorted her back to her room and lingered in the doorway. "For what it is worth," the commander said, "in 12 years of service I have never seen Calum Voss walk away from anything. Not from a battlefield, not from a negotiation, not from a threat." She paused. "He walked away from you today." She left before Sable could respond. That night, Sable dreamed. She stood in a vast underground chamber, lit by phosphorescent moss that clung to the walls in patches of blue-green light. The air was cool and damp, tasting of minerals and deep earth. At the center of the chamber, directly beneath where the sacred wolf sat in the hall above, the ground was split open. A fissure ran through the stone floor, narrow but deep, and from within it came a sound. Breathing. Slow, immense, rhythmic. Something beneath the earth was alive, and it was sleeping, and its sleep was growing restless. Sable knelt beside the fissure and pressed her palm flat against the stone. Warmth surged through her hand, flooding her arm, her body. The tether that had lived beneath her ribs ignited into something blinding, and in the warmth, she sensed a voice. Not words, not language, but meaning pressed directly into her mind like a handprint in wet clay. "Wake me." Then a hand closed around her shoulder from behind, and she spun around. Archon Voss stood behind her, but he was wrong. His eyes were fully gold, his features sharper, more angular, as though the wolf beneath his skin was pressing outward. He looked at her with desperate recognition, like he had been searching for her for a very long time. "Do not wake it," he said. "Not yet. Not until you understand what it will cost." Sable woke gasping, drenched in sweat. She pressed her hand against her sternum. The tug was different now. Deeper, more insistent, and layered beneath it, woven in like a second thread twisted around the first, she sensed something new. Him. Faint and distant, like hearing music through a wall, but unmistakable. The Archon's presence hummed at the edge of her awareness, and she knew with absolute certainty that he was awake right now, somewhere in this building, and that he had dreamed the same dream. A knock came at her door. Hard, urgent, rattling the hinges. A temple guard stood in the corridor, his face pale and drawn. "The Archon requires your presence immediately. The statue has left the pedestal entirely, and it is walking toward the eastern wall." He paused, swallowing hard. Toward the sealed catacombs beneath the temple. The catacombs were sealed with a door that had no handle, no hinges, and no visible mechanism for opening. A single slab of moonite set flush into the eastern wall of the sanctum hall's lowest level, carved with a spiral that had teeth, like a jaw curling inward on itself. The sacred wolf now stood before this door, its stone body fully descended from the pedestal for the first time in recorded memory. Its muzzle was pressed against the slab, and a low vibration hummed through the floor, so deep Sable felt it in her molars rather than heard it. "It has been like this since the 4th hour," Orin said, his voice brittle. "We cannot move it. We tried." He gestured at scratch marks on the floor where someone had attempted to drag the statue backward. "It weighs as much as a house." Archon Voss stood apart from the gathered scholars and guards, his arms crossed, his expression closed. He had not looked at Sable since she arrived. The deliberateness of it was louder than words. She pulled Orin aside and told him about the dream. The underground chamber, the fissure, the breathing beneath the stone, the voice pressing meaning into her mind. She did not describe the Archon appearing behind her with golden eyes and desperate recognition. That part she kept locked behind her teeth. Orin listened without interrupting, his face growing progressively more ashen. "There is something alive beneath this temple," he said, almost to himself, "and it is calling to you." "You do nothing," Archon Voss said from across the room, still not looking at her. "You do not approach that door. You do not answer whatever is calling you. Is that clear?" "With respect, my lord, doing nothing does not seem to be working particularly well. The statue is actively trying to open that door, which is precisely why we do not help it." "And if it opens on its own?" He finally looked at her, and the conflict in his face was raw. She could sense him through that strange new thread, faint but unmistakable. His fear, not of the door, not of whatever lay beneath the temple, but of her, of what she was becoming entangled in. "Then we will deal with it," he said quietly. "But you will not be anywhere near it when it happens." He assigned her a new room on the opposite side of the temple, as far from the sealed door as the building allowed. Commander Thessaly moved her things personally and set a rotating guard outside. That night, alone in her new room, the ache had not dulled with distance. If anything, being farther away sharpened it, a constant low-grade tension beneath her sternum that intensified every time she thought about the door, about the breathing, about the wolf pressing its muzzle against the moonite slab like a dog trying to dig through a wall to reach its owner. She could sense him too, fainter now, but present, a steady hum at the periphery of her awareness. He was awake. He was pacing. She could feel the restless, agitated energy rolling off him like heat from a forge. Sleep came reluctantly, in shallow waves. Each time she sank beneath the surface, she caught fragments. The underground chamber, the fissure widening, the breathing growing louder, and always that voice, "Wake me, Please, I have been here so long." She woke before dawn with tears on her face and no memory of crying. The days that followed settled into a strange, tense rhythm. Sable was permitted to move freely within the temple but was forbidden from entering the sanctum hall. She spent mornings in the archive with Orin, poring over fragments of surviving pre-burning texts, searching for any reference to the seal. Afternoons she spent in the temple's herb garden, partly because Orin had asked her to catalog the medicinal plants growing there, and partly because it was the only place where the ache eased to something almost bearable. The lavender helped. The chamomile helped more. She buried her hands in the soil and focused on the smell of green things growing, and tried not to think about the fact that her entire life had been upended by a piece of stone. She did not see the Archon for 3 days. His absence was conspicuous and clearly intentional. He was avoiding her. She told herself she did not care. On the 4th day, she was kneeling in the garden, replanting a row of feverfew that had been choked by weeds, when a shadow fell across her hands. Archon Voss stood at the edge of the garden path, watching her with a look that suggested he had been standing there for longer than he would ever admit. His hands were clasped behind his back, and there was dirt on the cuff of his sleeve. Fresh dirt, the same dark soil she was working in. "You have been pulling weeds," Sable said, staring at the dirt on his cuff. "I have not," the Archon replied. "There is soil on your sleeve." He glanced down, and the faintest flush crept up the side of his neck. "I brushed against something on the way here." "The garden path is paved stone. There is nothing to brush against." He looked at her for a long moment, and a warmth, almost sheepish, cracked through his composure like light through a shutter. "The rosemary bed needed attention," he said finally, very quietly. Sable bit her lip to keep from smiling. The alpha of the 5 valley packs, the most feared wolf in Edenmere, had been secretly weeding the garden. She filed this information away like treasure. He sat on the stone bench at the garden's edge, which should have looked absurd. A man that large perched on a bench designed for elderly priestesses, but somehow he made it look deliberate. The silence between them was different from before. Not hostile, not strained. Companionable. "Orin tells me you identified a root compound that may have sedative properties for wolves, something the healers had overlooked." "Moon petal," Sable said. "It grows wild here. Most people think it is a weed, but the root produces a compound that interacts with lupine neurochemistry. I noticed because the temple cats avoid it completely, but the garden foxes sleep near it." "You are observant?" "I am a sweeper. Sweepers notice things on the ground that other people walk over." His gaze deepened. "You are not a sweeper," he said. "Not anymore. What am I then?" He did not answer. He stood, brushed invisible dust from his coat, and walked away. But this time, his pace was slower, and at the garden gate, he paused. "The moon petal. Bring some to Orin. I have not slept properly in 6 days." Sable sat in the dirt, her heart hammering, and realized the tether in her chest had gone quiet. Not gone, settled. Like a compass needle that had finally stopped spinning and found its bearing. It was pointing at the gate where he had disappeared. The moon petal worked. Orin brewed it into a tincture following Sable's instructions, and that evening a guard delivered the small glass vial to the Archon's quarters. The next morning, Commander Thessaly appeared at Sable's door with a look that fell somewhere between impressed and suspicious. "He slept," Thessaly said. 4 hours. Longest stretch in over a week. "The council physicians tried everything," Thessaly continued. "Sedative herbs, breathing techniques, exhaustion protocols. Nothing worked. Your weed worked." "It is not a weed. Orin wants to study it further. The Archon wants to see you. Now." She found him in his study, a high-ceilinged room lined with maps and tactical charts. He stood behind a wide oak desk covered in correspondence, and when she entered, he looked up, and she saw it immediately. The shadows under his eyes were lighter. The drawn tension in his face had softened, like ice beginning to thaw at the edges. He looked human in a way he had not since the first morning she had seen him. "The tincture," he said. "How did you know it would work?" "I did not know," Sable admitted. "I noticed the foxes sleeping near the moon petal and made a guess." "A guess? Based on fox behavior?" "Foxes are surprisingly informative." He stared at her. His composure cracked, subtle but unmistakable, and he exhaled through his nose in a way that was almost a laugh. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I have questions about the compound." What followed was an hour-long conversation about moon petal root chemistry that should have been dry and clinical, but was not. The Archon asked precise, intelligent questions. Sable answered with the kind of detail that came from years of quiet observation in the wards, where medicine was scarce and improvisation was survival. He listened with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced. No one had ever listened to her like this. Not with polite tolerance, not with half attention, but with genuine, focused interest in what she knew. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. "You should have been trained as a healer," the Archon said. "Nobody trains foundlings," Sable said, and immediately wished she could pull the words back. They had come out sharper than she intended, edged with a bitterness she usually kept buried. His expression shifted. "No," he said quietly. "They do not. And that is a failure of this territory, not of you." Her throat felt tight. She could count on one hand the number of times in her life someone had told her that the gaps in her existence were not her fault. "The tincture needs to be brewed fresh daily," she said, redirecting before emotion reached her voice. "The active compounds degrade within 12 hours. I can prepare it each evening and have it delivered." "Or you could bring it yourself," the Archon said. Their eyes met. The thread between them hummed, warm and steady. "If that is more practical," he added, his tone carefully neutral. "It is more practical," Sable agreed, equally neutral. Neither of them was fooling anyone, and so a routine formed. Each evening, after the temple settled into its nighttime quiet, Sable brewed a fresh vial of moon petal tincture and carried it to the Archon's study. The first 2 nights, she handed it to him at the door and left. The 3rd night, he invited her in. The 4th, she did not wait to be invited. They talked. Not about the statue, not about the sealed door, not about the thing breathing beneath the temple. He asked about her years growing up, and she told him about the matron who taught her to identify plants by smell, about the night she accidentally turned a guardsman's poultice purple with the wrong root, about the first time she saw snow falling through the high windows of the dormitory and thought the sky was coming apart. He listened to everything. He remembered everything. "The matron," he said one evening, 3 weeks into their routine. "The one who taught you plants. What was her name?" She had mentioned the woman once, in passing, on the 3rd night. "Odessa," she said. "She passed when I was 11. "I am sorry," the Archon said, and meant it. She noticed things about him in return. He held his pen too tightly when frustrated, leaving indentations in the paper. He rubbed the bridge of his nose when tired, a gesture so habitual he did not seem aware of it. He kept a small carved wolf on his desk that he turned in his fingers when thinking, a childhood object, worn smooth by decades of handling. "It was my mother's," he said when he caught her looking at it. He set it down quickly, as if embarrassed. "It is lovely." "It is poorly carved. She was not talented with a knife." "That is what makes it lovely." He went very quiet and something shifted between them, a barrier thinning, a wall developing cracks. She could sense his emotion through the thread that connected them, a deep, aching tenderness he was trying desperately to suppress. "You should go," he said softly. "It is late." At the door, she turned back. "You have not taken the tincture tonight." I know. You will not sleep without it. I know that too. He was looking at her in a way that made her pulse stutter. I find that I would rather be awake right now. Sable left before her face could betray her completely. She made it halfway down the corridor before she pressed her back against the wall and covered her burning cheeks with both hands. She was in trouble. Deep, irreversible, exhilarating trouble. The dream came again that night. The underground chamber, the fissure, the breathing. But this time, when she pressed her hand to the stone, she did not hear the voice saying, "Wake me." She heard screaming. Hundreds of voices, layered and overlapping, howling in pain and fury and grief. The sound was so enormous it drove her to her knees. She clamped her hands over her ears, but it poured through her fingers, through her skull, through her bones. And beneath the screaming, she sensed the Archon. Not beside her this time, but below her, beneath the stone, trapped in the dark with whatever was down there, and it was devouring him. Sable woke screaming his name. She ran. Barefoot, still in her sleeping clothes, Sable tore through the temple corridors in the gray half-light before dawn. The stone was ice against her feet. Her breath came in ragged gasps that echoed off the walls. She could feel him through the thread, faint and flickering, like a candle guttering in wind. She reached his quarters and slammed both palms against the door. Calum. His name came out raw and desperate, stripped of title and formality. Calum, open the door. Silence. The thread flickered again, weaker. Commander Thessaly appeared at the end of the corridor, armed, alarmed, her hair still loose from sleep. What is happening? Something is wrong with the Archon. Break the door. Thessaly did not hesitate. She shouldered past Sable and drove the heel of her boot into the lock. The door splintered inward on the second strike. The Archon was on the floor. He was on his knees beside the bed, his hands clamped against his skull, his entire body rigid and shaking. A low, terrible sound came from his throat, not a growl, not a scream, but something between the two. An animal sound of pain that no human voice should have been able to make. His eyes were open but unseeing, the irises blazing solid gold. He is trapped in it, Sable gasped, dropping to her knees beside him. The place beneath the temple, it has him. Do not touch him, Thessaly warned, reaching for her. When an alpha is in a shift crisis, physical contact can trigger a violent response. He could hurt you badly without meaning to. Sable ignored her. She grabbed his face between both hands and forced his head up. His skin was burning, fever hot, slick with sweat. The gold in his eyes was blinding up close like staring into molten metal. Come back, she said. Calum, come back. Follow my voice. The thread between them flared. His awareness snagged on her presence like a drowning man catching a rope. His hands released his skull and seized her wrists instead, his grip desperate, his fingers digging into her wrists. Sable. Her name came out distorted, guttural, barely recognizable, but he said it. He knew her. I am here, she said, her thumbs stroking his cheekbones. I am right here. Come back to me. The gold receded, slowly, painfully, like something being dragged backward against its will. His grip on her wrists loosened, and the desperate strength left his fingers, leaving faint crescent marks pressed into her skin. He stared at her, his breathing ragged, his face slack with exhaustion. I could feel it, he said, his voice ravaged, pulling me down, into the dark. His eyes dropped to her wrists, to the marks his grip had left. The look that crossed his face was worse than pain, self-loathing. I hurt you, he said. You did not mean to. That does not matter. He pulled away, pressing himself backward against the bed frame, putting distance between them. His hands were shaking. Whatever is beneath that temple, it is reaching through me, and now it is reaching through you. Calum, Sable started. Archon, he corrected, and the word landed like a door slamming shut. Sable flinched. Thessaly stepped forward. My lord, we should get you to the healers. No. The Archon stood, and the transition from broken man on the floor to commanding alpha was so swift and so complete that it felt violent. His face closed like a book, his shoulders squared. The shaking stopped. Summon the council. I want the sanctum hall sealed. No one enters, and Miss Sable is to be moved to quarters outside the temple grounds. You are sending me away. I am protecting you. From what? From the thing in the dark or from yourself? His jaw clenched so hard she could see the muscles jump. Both. That is not your decision to make, Sable said, her voice rising. I am the Archon of Edenmere. Everything that happens in this territory is my decision to make, including this, especially this. He turned to Thessaly. Escort her out, now. Thessaly touched Sable's arm gently. Come with me. Sable shook her off. She stared at the Archon's back, at the rigid line of his spine, at the tension coiled in every muscle. She could sense him across the distance. He was not cold, he was terrified. The ice in his voice was terror wearing a mask. You are making a mistake, she said. He did not turn around. I know, he said. Thessaly led her out in silence. The morning air was cool and damp, tasting of dew and pine. Sable was placed in a groundskeeper's cottage at the edge of the temple grounds. A guard was posted at the door. The ache was worse than anything she had felt before. The thread between them, which had grown warm and steady over 3 weeks of evening conversations and careful, tentative closeness, was now stretched taut and vibrating with distress. She could feel his pain at the separation as clearly as her own, a mirrored wound, doubled by the connection they both refused to name. Because that is what it was now. She could no longer pretend otherwise. Whatever connected them, whatever the wolf had awakened when it turned its ancient stone head toward a temple sweeper, it was a bond, incomplete, unnamed, unacknowledged, but real. And being apart was slowly, steadily destroying them both. The first day was difficult. The second was worse. By the third, Sable could barely eat. Her hands shook constantly. Migraines drove her to her knees in the dim cottage, blinding and relentless. The tincture, brewed by Oren without her hands, without her intuition for the precise steeping time and temperature, was not working. She knew this the way she knew her own heartbeat. On the 4th morning, Thessaly came to the cottage. She stood in the doorway and looked at Sable with an expression caught between professional concern and personal fury. You look terrible, the commander said. Thank you, Sable replied from the bed where she had been lying motionless for 2 hours. He looks worse. Sable closed her eyes. I know. Oren has identified what you two share, Thessaly said, sitting on the edge of the bed, which creaked dangerously. It is in the pre-burning texts, buried in a passage everyone assumed was metaphorical. A resonance bond. The wolf did not just acknowledge you, Sable. It recognized you as the Archon's counterpart. His stabilizer. The thread that keeps the wolf from consuming the man. And he sent me away. Because he is a fool. Thessaly said matter-of-factly. A noble, self-sacrificing, heroic fool who would rather let himself be eaten alive by whatever is beneath that temple than risk a scratch on someone he cares about. Oren believes the seal is weakening, Thessaly continued, her voice dropping. The wolf statue moved because it sensed you could reinforce it, but the thing below is fighting back. It is using the Archon as a conduit, attacking him through his wolf, trying to break him so the seal breaks with him. She met Sable's eyes. If his wolf consumes him fully, Sable, if he loses himself to the shift, the seal will shatter, and whatever is down there will be free. Then he needs me beside him, Sable said, sitting up despite the pain splitting her skull. He does, but he will never ask. He will never allow it. He has given explicit orders that you are not to enter the temple. Then I will not ask permission, Sable said. Thessaly looked at her for a long moment. Then the commander smiled, slow and fierce. The guard rotation changes at the 9th hour, she said. There is a gap of 4 minutes between shifts. The East Garden Gate does not lock properly. I have been meaning to file a maintenance request about it. She stood, straightened her uniform, and walked to the door. I did not tell you any of this, she added. Tell me what? Sable replied. The East Garden Gate opened with a whisper. Sable slipped through in bare feet, the damp grass cold and slick beneath her soles. The temple loomed against the night sky, its stone walls silver under a 3/4 moon. The guard station at the main entrance was lit, but the garden path was dark, shielded by the high hedgerows that she had spent weeks tending. She entered through the kitchen passage, a narrow corridor used by the domestic staff that connected the garden stores to the upper levels. Her heartbeat was deafening in her ears. The thread drew her forward like a hand wrapped around her spine, insistent, urgent, leading her upward through hallways she could have walked blind. She found him in his study. The door was open. A single candle burned on the desk. Archon Calum Voss sat behind it with his head in his hands, his fingers buried in his hair, and he looked like a man who had been sitting that way for hours. The moon petal tincture sat untouched on the desk beside him. Sable stepped inside and closed the door. His head came up. The candlelight caught his face, and Sable's breath left her entirely. He looked ravaged. The bruises under his eyes had deepened to dark crescents. His cheekbones were sharper than they had been 4 days ago, carved out by sleeplessness and whatever war was being waged inside him. The gold in his eyes was constant now, a permanent ring around his irises like a solar eclipse, his wolf pressing forward against the cage of his human form. Sable. Her name came out wrecked. He stood so fast his chair scraped backward across the stone floor. You should not be here. I know. I gave orders. I know that too. Then why are you here? His voice cracked on the last word, and the sound shattered something inside her. Because you are dying, Sable said, moving toward him. Because the tincture does not work without me. Because the bond we share is not a suggestion, Calum. It is a fact. And ignoring it is killing us both. He flinched at the word bond. If you stay close to me, it will use you. Whatever is sealed beneath the temple has been reaching through me for weeks, trying to find a way to break the seal. If our bond strengthens, you become a target, a lever it can pull. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I will not let you become collateral damage for a war that began a millennium before you were born. My whole life, Sable said quietly, people have made decisions for me. Where I would sleep, what I would eat, what I was worth. The matrons, the wardens, the temple administrators. Everyone decided for me because I had no name, no family, no claim to anything. She swallowed hard. You do not get to do that too. Not about this. Not about us. His composure crumbled. The mask, the authority, all of it fell away, and what remained was a man standing in candlelight who was afraid of losing something he had never expected to have. I do not know how to protect you from this, he said, and his voice sounded like it had been dragged over gravel. Then stop trying to protect me from it alone. She stepped around the desk. Her palms settled against his jaw, her thumbs tracing the dark crescents under his eyes. His skin was too warm again, the fever of a wolf pushing against its boundaries. I can feel you, she whispered. All the time, everywhere. When you are angry, I taste copper. When you are grieving, my chest fills with water. When you laugh, and you have only laughed twice in my presence. But when you do, it feels like sunlight breaking through a window I did not know was there. His hands came up to cover hers. His fingers trembled against her knuckles. Tell me to leave, Sable said. Mean it this time. Mean it through the bond where I can sense whether you are lying. And I will go. She felt him try, felt the word forming in his throat, felt him reaching for the cold, authoritative voice of the Archon, the one that issued orders and expected obedience. Felt it collapse before it reached his mouth. I cannot, he said. Then let me stay. He pressed his forehead against hers, his breath shuddering out. She could feel the bond flaring, widening, the thread becoming a river of warmth flooding through both of them. His wolf pressed forward, not aggressive, not feral, but yearning toward her with a desperation that matched his own. "Stay," he whispered. She kissed him. It was not tentative, not questioning. She rose onto her toes and pressed her mouth to his with all the certainty she had earned through weeks of separation and sleepless nights, and the relentless, aching need that had taught her what it meant to belong to someone. He responded like a dam breaking. His arms wrapped around her, lifting her against him, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other pressed flat against her lower back. He kissed her like she was the answer to every question he had ever been afraid to ask. "If we do this," he said against her lips, his voice rough and breathless, "the bond completes. There is no undoing it. You will be tied to me, to this, to whatever is coming. I need you to understand that." "I understand. I choose this. I choose you." He carried her to his chambers, and they sat together on the edge of the bed, foreheads touching, hands intertwined. The bond completed in stages, each point of contact deepening it, each whispered word weaving another strand into the connection between them. She felt his wolf rise to meet her, settle around her like a second skin, warm and protective and permanent. He felt the fraying edges of his control knit together where her presence touched them. When the bonding mark sealed, a warmth blazing where his lips pressed against the curve of her neck, hers against his shoulder, the bond snapped into fullness like a sunrise filling a dark room. Light and warmth and belonging flooded through them both, and the thing beneath the temple went quiet. They lay side by side afterward, his arms wrapped around her like the world might try to take her if he loosened his grip. "I can hear your heartbeat," Sable murmured against his skin. "It has been yours for longer than I wanted to admit," he replied, his voice drowsy and warm in a way she had never heard from him before. She felt him sinking. Sleep, real sleep, deep and uninterrupted, pulling him under. His breathing steadied. His arms grew heavy. His wolf settled, curled and content, and the bond hummed with quiet, golden peace. Sable closed her eyes and followed him into sleep. She woke in the dark. Not the warm dark of his chambers, the cold dark. The underground chamber stretched around her, vast and suffocating, the phosphorescent moss sputtering like a dying flame. The fissure in the floor had widened into a wound, 3 feet across, yawning open like a mouth. And the breathing from below had become a roar. Sable stood at the edge of the fissure and felt heat pouring upward like the breath of a furnace. The air shimmered with it, distorting the dim light, making the chamber walls ripple and dance. Calum was beside her. She sensed him through the bond before she saw him, solid and real and present in a way he had never been in these dreams before. The bonding mark on her neck pulsed with warmth, and his hand found hers in the dark. "We are here together this time," he said, his voice steady despite the enormity of what lay before them. "Together," she confirmed, squeezing his hand. The roar beneath them shifted. There was language in it, buried under centuries of rage and confinement. Sable knelt at the edge and pressed her free hand to the stone, ignoring Calum's immediate instinctive move to pull her back. The voice hit her like a wave, not a plea this time, a story. It poured through her in images and sensations, too fast and too dense to process as words. She let it wash through her and tried to hold on to the pieces as they passed. A wolf, not a statue. A living creature, immense and ancient, the first of its kind. The guardian of the valley before there were packs, before there were alphas, before the territory had a name. She saw it running through forests that no longer existed, drinking from rivers that had changed course centuries ago, sleeping in meadows that were now towns. And then, the betrayal. The first Alpha of Edenmere had not sealed the wolf to protect the valley. He had sealed it to take its power. The wolf's connection to the land, its authority over every living creature in the territory the first Alpha had wanted it for himself. And when the wolf refused to surrender it willingly, he used a binding ritual to trap it beneath the temple and siphon its strength into his bloodline. A millennium of imprisonment. The wolf had been conscious, alone, its power steadily drained to fuel the Alpha lineage that ruled above it. Every Archon who had ever led Edenmere had done so with stolen strength. The statue above was not a guardian, it was a lock. A monument to a crime so old that everyone had forgotten it was a crime at all. Sable gasped and pulled her hand from the stone, tears streaming down her face. She told Calum everything. She watched his face as the truth settled over him, watched the color drain from his skin, watched the horror bloom in his eyes as he understood what his bloodline had been built on. "No," he said, shaking his head. "That cannot be right. The founding texts say the first Alpha was chosen by the wolf. Blessed, anointed." "The founding texts were written by the first Alpha," Sable said gently. "He wrote his own story, and every generation after believed it because the wolf could not speak and the texts were the only record." Calum staggered to his feet. She felt his anguish pouring across the bond, a tidal wave of shame and fury crashing against the foundations of everything he had believed about himself, his family, his right to lead. "Everything I am," he said, his voice stripped bare. "Every Alpha before me. We have been parasites, feeding on a prisoner." "You did not know. That does not absolve me." "No," she agreed quietly. "But what you do next might." He looked at her, his eyes raw and searching. "The wolf acknowledged me because I am bonded to you," Sable said, her voice growing stronger. "Through me, it could finally reach the one person with the power to set it free. The key was never me, Calum. It was always you. You just needed someone to open the door." The chamber trembled. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ceiling and luminous fragments of moss rained down. "If I release it," Calum said slowly, "the Alpha bloodline loses its power. Every pack follows the Archon because of the wolf's stolen strength. Without it, I am just a man. The territory could fracture. There could be war." "There could be," Sable said. "Or you could be the first Archon who leads, not because of what was taken, but because of who he actually is. Because of what he chooses to do today." She took his hand and placed it on the stone beside the fissure. "You taught me something," she said, and her voice broke slightly. "In those evenings in your study, when you listened to me talk about plants and foxes and purple arms, you made me feel like I was worth listening to, like I mattered, not because of what I could give, but because of who I am." She pressed her hand over his. "The wolf deserves the same, to be seen, to be valued, not for what it gives, but for what it is." Calum stared at their joined hands on the stone. She could feel the war inside him, the terror of releasing control, of becoming powerless, of trusting that he was enough without the stolen strength that had propped up his bloodline for a millennium. She could also feel the moment he chose. It was quiet. No dramatic declaration, no roar, no theatrical gesture. He simply closed his eyes, pressed his palm flat against the stone, and let go. The effect was not quiet. Light erupted from the fissure, blinding and white and impossibly warm, flooding the chamber, flooding through the bond between them like a river bursting through a dam. The stone beneath their hands cracked and dissolved. The roar from below changed pitch, rising from rage into something else entirely. Relief. A sound like the entire earth exhaling after holding its breath for an age. The light pulsed once, twice, 3 times, and then it was gone. The chamber was silent. The fissure was closed. The moss on the walls glowed bright and steady. healthier than Sable had ever seen it, painting the underground space in vivid blue-green. And standing before them, where the fissure had been, was a wolf. Not stone, not a statue. A living, breathing creature the size of a draft horse, its fur the color of moonlit snow, its eyes ancient and golden and filled with a sorrow that was finally lifting. It looked at Calum, then it looked at Sable. Then it lowered its great head and pressed its muzzle gently against her palm. The same gesture the statue had made in the sanctum hall, but warm now, alive, real. An acknowledgement, a thank you. Then it turned and walked into the dark of the chamber, and the light of its fur faded like a lantern disappearing down a long road until it was gone. Sable and Calum stood alone in the silence. "It is done," he said, his voice barely a whisper. She wrapped her arms around him, and he held her so tightly she could feel his heartbeat against her own. The bond hummed between them, not with stolen power, not with ancient magic, but with something simpler and stronger. Choice. Theirs. They woke in his bed, in the gray light of early morning, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. Above them, in the sanctum hall, the pedestal where the sacred wolf had stood was empty. The territory did not fracture. It nearly did. The weeks that followed were the most turbulent Edenmere had seen in a generation. When the Pax learned that the Alpha bloodline's supernatural strength was gone, dissolved along with the seal that had generated it, the challenges came swiftly. 3 Pack leaders demanded a conclave. 2 openly questioned the Archon's fitness to rule. Calum faced every challenge without flinching. He told the truth, all of it, the founding crime, the imprisoned wolf, the stolen power. He stood before the conclave of 5 Pack leaders and said, "Everything your fathers told you about the authority of this office was built on a lie. The strength you followed was never mine. It belonged to a creature we held captive. I am asking you to follow me anyway, not because I am the strongest wolf in the room, because I am the one willing to stand here and tell you this when it would have been easier to let you believe." It was not a perfect speech. It was not met with universal applause, but it was honest, and honesty, spoken without flinching, carried its own kind of authority. The challenges receded. Not all at once, not without bruises and heated arguments and one memorable shouting match between Thessaly and a rival commander that ended with a broken table, but they receded. Sable stood beside him through all of it. The court's reaction to a foundling bonded to the Archon was predictably complicated. Whispers followed her through every corridor, but she had spent 22 years being invisible. And it turned out that a woman who had survived invisibility could survive scrutiny too. Oren documented everything with the meticulous care of a man who understood that history belonged to whoever held the pen, and that this time, the pen would tell the truth. Months later, on a morning in late spring, Sable woke slowly in the Archon's chambers. Sunlight poured through the windows, warm and golden, painting the room in amber. Calum was still asleep beside her, his breathing deep and even, one hand resting on her waist. She studied him in the quiet light. The tension that had once lived permanently in his jaw had softened into something that, in sleep, looked almost gentle. On the desk across the room, the small carved wolf his mother had made sat beside a fresh sprig of moon petal in a glass of water. Sable had placed it there the night before. A small thing, but he had noticed, and the look he had given her had said more than words. She settled back against his shoulder and closed her eyes. The bond hummed between them, warm and steady and entirely their own. No ancient magic, no stolen power. Just 2 people who had found each other in the space between what the world expected of them and what they had chosen for themselves. Outside, in the sanctum hall, the empty pedestal stood in a shaft of morning light. Someone, no one would ever admit to it, had placed a small bundle of wildflowers on the stone where the wolf had rested. The flowers were fresh. They were replaced every morning. And deep in the forests beyond the valley, in meadows that had not seen their like in ages, the wolves were singing.